Thank you. First of all, welcome to this discussion. I'm really excited to come to the event and to come to really Manchester. And it's really a privilege for me to talk about this topic, I think, in this beautiful, beautiful environment, this library. And particularly, I would like to say the Chinese painting, it's really, when we talk about Chinese painting, it's the best setting in library, it's the best setting. Because in China, and in the past, when the people talk about painting and view a painting, we not only say we see the painting, we look at painting, we read paintings. And so there's a similarity, there's a close relationship between the library, between books and the painting. And so I'm so thrilled to be here and to talk about. Let me begin to just show you a few slides and about the exhibition I curated, you just mentioned about. And then from there, we talk about what is the Chinese painting, okay? And that exhibition in 2013 and 2014, 10 years ago, features about 80, I would still say it's masterpieces of Chinese painting, drawn the sources, the collections from 21 museums across the globe, from the United States and to Europe, to Japan, to China. And they are treasures in Chinese painting history. The exhibition is divided into periods, and the first period is from 700 to 950. It basically focusing on the religious painting, particularly Buddhist art. Those works are made for us as votive images, for temples, for monasteries. And these are paintings of this period that survive, and mostly from the northwest China, very far northwest of China. And they managed to survive because they escaped the wars and the persecution throughout the dynasties. They were discovered in the early 20th century, these paintings. And really amazing treasures. Then from 950 to 1250, this section focusing on the artist's growing enthusiasm about the real world. It's not anymore the sacred and imaginary, the religious art, the religious world. And the artists observe and depict the real world, from landscape to the animals to human figures, in a very naturalistic, realistic way. And then the next section is about a very short period from 1250 to 1400. It's focusing on very small group of the artists living in the South. And they, instead of focusing on the real world, descriptive art, they focusing on the inner world. They use the imagery to express their inner thoughts and emotions. And many works produced by this group of artists you could call autobiographical. And then the exhibition moved on to the next section, which is the art under the Ming Dynasty. And we at that period, witness the explosion, artistic explosion, and of production. And artists at the time, particularly in the north, many cities becomes the centers of art production. They produce the works really appealing to the eyes and the heart. Pleasures, And that's what that period is really characteristic about. And then looking at this slide, for example, you see a group of women are playing football. And then we come to really the final section of the exhibition, which it deals with the two main themes. The one is that we call it the challenging the past. At that time, the artists really compete against each other and also compete against the past, the old masters, producing very, very diverse individual styles and the local schools. And the second theme of this last period from the 600 to 900, it's about the Western influence. At the time, the introduction of the Western visual art to China becomes very, very important, significant, the artistic force. So that is really the exhibition. It's about the story of the Chinese painting, the continuity and the changes of the Chinese painting. That's the main theme of that exhibition. And I used these two slides, just to show one of the paintings in that section, showing at the very far right, far left of the painting, and showing a skeleton holding an hourglass. The hourglass is not imagery derived from Chinese tradition. It's from an early 17th century Dutch prince. The exhibition not only really talk about the main narrative of Chinese painting, the story, so-called the story of Chinese painting, but also tries to inviting the visitors to look at Chinese painting closely and to look at the materials, techniques, formats, all these aspects, and to try to understand more deeply. So in the introduction section of the exhibition, and we showed this painting and the subject matter, which is about making the silk. And also we in the introductory area and showing a short film about how the Chinese painting, particularly on silk, how the silk painting was made. I guess that's hopefully it's a useful introduction to that exhibition and also to our discussion. What do you think?
Sure. And thank you, Dr. Zhang, for such a fascinating historical overview of the themes and also contents of the paintings. And speaking of the paintings, I have indeed got some questions for you. So would you share with the audience some major forms of Chinese paintings and how do those forms relate to their functions?
That's really important, I thought, as a viewer, as a visitor to the museum. If you face a Chinese painting, I think that sometimes we forget the materiality of the painting. Painting is not just an image, it's an object as well. That is the concept. I think we sometimes when we engage with, say, non-Western art or the culture you are not familiar with, people tend to focus on imagery and not the support of the imagery, the function of the imagery, the forms of the imagery. And so I think it's a great question to ask about. The Chinese painting, the format, or we could call form in English, is really the three basic forms, primary forms. Hand scroll, we call hand scroll, is a horizontal scroll, and then hanging scroll or vertical format and scroll. Both are scrolls. And that is an important concept. The scrolls, the Chinese painting, sometimes we call the scroll painting. That's very important. And then the third format is album. It's like a book. So these three are very, very, how to say, the quintessential, the formats of the Chinese painting. But we also need to keep in mind that these three formats had a history. Beyond these three formats, or before these formats, we need to think about the formats. These three formats, when they started. And before these formats exist, what are the other Chinese painting formats? For example, before the hanging scroll appeared in history quite late in the long history of the Chinese painting. It started only, say, if we based on the evidence, the surviving example, that started in 10th century. Although the records show that, and in 9th century, there already are the hanging scrolls. Before the hanging scroll, and there were paintings on screens. Screen is one of the main formats before the hanging scrolls. And also there are some other formats, for example, the banners, and which has a longer history. But these screens and banners disappeared since, if we have to put a date, that's since the 12th century, and they disappeared from the painting history. It's a fascinating history if we look into the formats. And it tells about, we would talk about the functions and the viewing display space later, and they have an impact on them.
Mm-hmm. That's fantastic, and the kind of attention to the materiality of the paintings are really easily ignored, right? Particularly when we are exposed to different painting traditions. So I'm wondering, like, how materials and techniques of Chinese paintings differ from those in some other painting traditions?
I think that it's important to look at painting closely. When we look at a painting closely, and we understand more and through understanding the materials and the techniques, and in Chinese painting, the basic materials are the support. Say we're talking about the painting support, are silk, which used early, then paper. The paper and the silk are the two basic, the main supports. And then we use the ink, and we use the pigment, natural organic pigments or mineral pigments, and these, but the water-based, and rather than like in Europe, the oil-based has a long tradition, and but of course the water-based in Europe, tempera, for example, but in China, and we usually use the water-based pigments. The ink is another we could call the pigments, and used very, very extensively. And I'd like to show you this short film, and which is included in the exhibition to show how a silk painting was made, was produced. That short film, it's on YouTube. You could watch it. I think it's worthwhile to watch it if you like to understand the process of the making silk painting, particularly in a particular we called 工笔 style, or the meticulous drawing style, and which involves in really the choosing the silk and the process the silk. The silk surface needs to be sized, and with alum and glue, animal glue, and then you need to when you paint in this 𝗃𝗃𝗃 style, you not only need to apply the pigments on the surface on the front, also you need to, before you apply the pigments on the front, you need to apply the pigment on the back of the silk, and which is very laborious, very detailed, the process, which really really useful when you know this process, and then you look at the 𝗃𝗃𝗃 painting. It will give you more, perhaps, information on that painting.
Also, just now you mentioned the 𝗃𝗃, and I remember why. I saw some 𝗃𝗃 or meticulous paintings, and I often see it's applied to, say, flowers and birds. So, are there some? What are some major themes, categories, or genres of Chinese paintings that you would like to share with the audience?
That's great question. When we see many paintings, you know, as a human being, like to categorize, to group the paintings together. What are the subject matter? What are the categories? What are the genres? And for Chinese painting, there's a long history of categorization of genres, like in European tradition. And basically, I think the similarities with the European tradition, there's a figure painting, there's a landscape painting, there's, we would call birds and the flowers. And in Europe, we call the still life. Yeah, it's a similar subject matter, but differently. And this is interesting. And we called birds and the flowers because in Chinese painting, rarely you find still life, yeah, and the flowers or birds or life, living, and the artists depict them, and which is a different case in European the painting tradition, and then the landscape painting in Chinese we call mountain and water, and which tells that the Chinese artist 1,000 years focusing on the natural world, and particularly the countryside, the mountainous areas, the big rivers and the lakes. And those, because the subject matter, so the Chinese, say, the art critics and the art historians, and categorize this group of the paintings, this group of the subject matter as mountains and waters. And in fact, this genre is on the top of the hierarchy of the genres, which compared to the European tradition is different. And in Europe, landscape painting arrived quite late, yeah, and in the 15th century or the 16th century Renaissance period. But in China, the landscape painting started as a few centuries earlier. From the 10th century onwards, the landscape painting becomes perhaps the most influential, most rendered the genre. And I could show you the one painting which was painted in the 11th century by a painter called 𝗃𝗃𝗃𝗃, who in his time it was seen as the master of masters of landscape painting. He was very popular in the imperial court and in the society. The officials invited him to paint on screens and displayed in their mansions. And the palace, the empress invited him, commissioned him to paint landscapes and displayed in the palaces. And this is one of his paintings now in the Metropolitan Museum of Art. Why the Chinese artists enshrined landscape, this genre? And this 𝗃𝗃𝗃𝗃 himself has written some text. It's really handed down from his son. And this is one of the extract from the text he wrote about, and why the landscape painting appeared to him, and indeed appeared to many people at the time. And basically what he says here, and when you are sitting in a room and you face a scene of countryside, and your heart melts, and you feel you connected with nature, and this is the best thing, and you can really have. So that's why the landscape painting is so important for the personal nourishment at the time. So that's why the Chinese artists and the viewers always like to have the landscape and to look at and to accompany with.
And thank you so much for excerpting this wonderful paragraph and also showing us 𝗘𝗃𝗲𝗁 painting. And with this, I noticed in his painting there are some seals. So my next question is, what are some primary relationships or interrelationships between the painted and textual contents in Chinese paintings?
That is quite, I would say, difficult aspect of the Chinese painting, particularly for the audience or for the visitors who don't often encounter with the Chinese painting, and which I would try to show an example. For example, this painting, in the pictorial space, you see so many seals there. Yeah, so many seals. And in Chinese painting, that's the commonplace. In European painting, and we really kind of forbid to use the words and marks in the pictorial space. And because the painting is supposed to be representation of the world, of the real world. And if you put the marks, seals, or inscriptions on, that is not painting. Painting is supposed to be a window to the world. But in Chinese painting, is not like that. In some stage of the Chinese painting history, there are the paintings, no words, no seal marks, but most of them with seal marks. These seal marks are either artists or their friends, contemporary friends, or from the collectors of the later generations. And this interrelationship between the image and the marks and the inscription and words, a very, very important aspect of the Chinese painting. And the inscriptions can be written by the artist himself about the artwork he created, and can be written by his friends, and can be written by the later generation. And for example, in this painting, we're showing this very skeletal horse, and the inscriptions on the top of the painting is not written by the artist himself, but written by an 18th century. This painting is the late 13th century painting, or a 14th century painting, and the inscription was written by an emperor of the 18th century. And so these complicated historical relationship between the image and the words are very, very important aspects, and can be quite intricate and complicated. But it's fascinating in terms of the history of the painting itself, how the painting is viewed, how the painting is used, and how the painting is created.
Thank you so much for drawing our attention to this crucial difference, right? Remember visiting Albert Dürer's exhibition once, and like basically finding his name or finding his mark is some kind of game that I can find. But when it comes to Chinese painting, there are a lot of like even flaunting use of seals to insert one's mark on those paintings, be them like the painters themselves or the collectors. And so while we are on the topic of those people involved in the production of a painting, so my next question would be, who are the makers of Chinese paintings?
That's a great question. When we look at, go to museums or galleries to look at paintings, and I think that often we perhaps forget about the person behind or the people behind these paintings, who made them and who are the artists, and what they look like, what they think about, and how they live. And this is really important. When we talk about Chinese painting or any painting from any tradition, and we need to talk about the people who made them. And I remember the Gombrich, the very eminent art historians say, there's no such a thing as art. There's only artists. So the people, it's very important here. And for example, the maker of this painting, who is called 𝗘𝗃𝗲𝗁, who lived in South China, in Yangzhou, and sometimes in Hangzhou area. His life was difficult. And he had, when he was a child, he had a very good classical education, but he failed several times the civil service exam. And then he ended up working as a secretary, as an assistant to an official, to civil official. But then what happened was the Mongols took over China, became the new ruler of China, and he, with a few of his friends and his officials, his superiors, and tried to fight against the Mongol, but failed. But he determined to be a loyalist to the dynasty he served, the Song dynasty he served. He refused to work for the Mongol government, and the consequence is, and he had to live in poverty. And he had no salary, and he had to paint and for sale, and wrote for sale. He's a very accomplished poet and a calligrapher and a painter. So he used his skills and for his living or for his family. And so he painted this one, which very poignant story about this is that he painted this one. He lamented the loss of the old dynasty, but he still kept his integrity, and those are the words he wrote at the end of this scroll. And I'd like to, can I read his writing about the image? Just to show you that is the writing he wrote about. this image. The first, he wrote a poem about this. Ever since the clouds and the mist fell upon the heavenly paths, empty have been 12 stables of the previous dynasty. Who is there today to lament over the bones of this noble steed? In the setting sun along the sandy shore, he casts a shadow like a mountain. And he carried on. One of the classics says a horse's ribs should be slender and numerous. An ordinary horse has only 10 ribs. One with more than this is a noble steed. But only 1,000-league horse has as many as 15 ribs. If you want to paint a bones beneath the flesh, especially if you intend to make the 15 ribs visible, they will only be visible if the horse is emaciated. That's why he painted this very skeletal horse. If you counted the ribs, they are 15. And so he is a type of, he represents a type of artist who's not only the painter, professional painter, but also poet, a calligrapher, and he represents this group of the painters we call in Chinese history a literati. And literati is the one main type respected highly in Chinese painting history. There's another type who's not literati, who's purely professional, very skillful artist, who we called, in Chinese called 行家. Compared to literati, we called 力家. 力家 literally translate amateur artist. Amateur artists in Chinese painting history ranked very high, highly than the 行家, than the professionals, because they, in their work, they express their personal feelings, emotions, ideas. The 行家, either the professionals serve the court, imperial court, if you're good enough, or you serve the society outside the court. So basically, these are two types artists, say, are the makers of the paintings.
Having discussed the types of makers of Chinese paintings, I'm also wondering who were the viewers, right, and users and collectors of those fascinating paintings.
That's a great important aspect. Really, we need to ask when we look at a Chinese painting. And again, with this example, the seals tells a lot about who are the viewers and who are the collectors. And on this section of the painting, you see many seals. Some of them are by collectors, some by the artist himself, some by his friends. But the most seals are on this section are by the 18th century Emperor Qianlong, and who is avid collector of classical Chinese painting. And contemporary art historians really, in many times, criticize Qianlong, spoiled the painting by put too many of his stamps on the painting. But also there are the seals by previous, say, private collectors. So for example, Xiang Yuanbian, who's the one of the perhaps the most eminent collectors in Chinese painting history. He lived in the late Ming Dynasty. He has a very good eye and have the means to collect. And he's from very wealthy family of owning a lot of land in the south. And the family run a pawn shop to start with, and then build wealth. And he is very cultured, and he collects these classical paintings. He put his seals, and a few of them on this slide are by him. So the collectors can be imperial, can be private, and the two most important imperial collectors, one we mentioned, the Qianlong. The other one, perhaps we should mention, is 𝗱𝗲𝘁 in the early 12th century, and who really started with the imperial collection, and he even commissioned a catalog. He himself, the 𝗱𝗲𝘁, is accomplished painter himself. And the private collectors started in at least the Song Dynasty. There are numerous collectors, particularly from the scholar class, and they like to collect the scroll paintings, and they add their colophons on. They also add their seals on these paintings.
Yeah, when you just mentioned that the inscription is by an emperor, I was wondering, whether that was the Qianlong emperor or not. And I think the painting you just showed about the cranes were actually by Emperor Huizong, right?
Exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly.
And so we have talked about the paintings and also people involved in the production of paintings and appreciation of paintings. And probably now let's move on to the context or the display of those paintings. So I'm wondering what were some major types of viewing space for Chinese paintings?
Yeah, that is really the question I often ask myself. Particularly, I was conscious about this question when I really started work and lived in the UK. It's a completely different environment of the viewing paintings, and remind me of viewing painting in China is different. The space is different, behavior is different. And let me show again with the slides to show that. And this is a painting of the Ming Dynasty, and which really portrays the viewing situation, if you like, and of a hanging scroll. And this is a very popular subject matter in Chinese painting from Ming Dynasty onwards. So if we look at closely, the setting is a garden, and then the display of the scroll there on the far right of the slide, and is held by a boy, two boys, and so it tells us the display of Chinese painting is temporary, not necessarily hang on the wall. The painting not necessarily for hanging on the wall. That is the difference. I feel very strongly about this. The display Chinese painting is for the time when you want to view it. You not necessarily have to hang there and for many years there. That is the one difference. And this also applies to, particularly perhaps, to the horizontal scroll. Horizontal scroll in its, say, its normal state of being is rolled up, put into a box. When you want to look at it, you open the box, you unroll it. and unroll it section by section to look at. So display of Chinese painting, we can conclude it's a temporary display. And even for some paintings hang on the wall, it's seasonal. You don't usually hang a painting for years there. The paintings and the displays, say in the spring, then you take off at the summertime. And in order to preserve the painting, the summer in China is really hot. And in autumn, you display another painting, which subject matter linked to the season. That's what the Chinese artists like, and the viewers and the collectors like to do. And in autumn, you displayed, for example, chrysanthemum, which is the autumn flower, and the timing is good, and for displaying such subject matter of painting. And so it's a very, very temporary display. And of course, before the 12th century and even after 12th century, there are many paintings displayed in palaces and in monastery and in private houses. But most perhaps important fact is it's a temporary display. Yeah.
Thank you very much for drawing our attention to the temporal dimension, right? The temporariness and also the seasonal timing of paintings. And my next question is about the viewing space. So how did the viewing space shape the audience's viewing experiences of a painting?
That is really a lead-on question, isn't it? It's about how the space, how the viewing situation and shape and condition our interaction with the painting in terms of the viewing as the action. And I'd like to again use a few examples to illustrate that, to answer this. And for example, this early format of the Chinese painting is a banner. The subject matter is the Bodhisattva. It's used as the votive image and used, in fact, for funeral, the situation. And this was used, this type of painting usually used outdoors. And this one was supposed to be used in the procession of a funeral. And you imagine, use the stick and raise this banner into the sky. And this painting is just a very thin, fine silk, just a one layer of silk. There's no backing, no lining. And the audience of this painting is in the procession, in the funeral procession. And they look at this image, and only the image, not the blank space beyond that bodhisattva image, because the silk is translucent, almost transparent. You look at this bodhisattva, this deity, it's like flying in the sky. And that experience is different from you looking at a hanging scroll, hang in the garden and or on the wall. Then this painting, very small, very modest size, but it's produced during the Song dynasty, the later Song or Southern Song dynasty, a court artist called Mao Song. And if we look at closely look at how the painting was produced, it uses gold and the ink. It's a mixture of the gold and the ink to render the furs with the different lengths of the strokes. Amazing if you like to call the realism. And also, he used the gold to apply to the eye, to the white area of the eye. And all these can be very apparent if you look at this painting under candle of lamp, and in the dark room. In the medieval China, or in fact in Japan, in the 17th century, this painting was already in Japan, was in a temple, and owned by an imperial family. And imagine this painting was hung in a Japanese manner in a dark alcove of a hall. And you sit on the floor looking at this painting under the candlelight. You can see the gold, the reflection of the gold. And you see this monkey seems alive. It's a similar effect as the European, the Renaissance, the painting. The background of the Christian imagery icons is gold usually. So in the candlelight, the effect is different. So the space and the viewing situation changes the people's perception. So I'm really interested in this viewing situation historically as well as contemporarily. So when we look at the painting in a museum, in the exhibition, we really need to dig deep more and deeper to look at what is the historical viewing situation was. And it will help us to understand more about how the painting was used historically, how certain paintings move the people.
Absolutely agree about the historical dimension of viewing. That's super important. And thank you very much for drawing our attention to the contemporary viewing context as well. And which leads me to my last question, that is, how does the museum's exhibition space differ from those viewing spaces in the past and present? And how in the past, and how does the museum exhibition space shape our viewing perception of Chinese paintings?
That is a brilliant question about, since I have been working at the V&A for 20 years now, and before that I also worked, as you mentioned at the beginning, in Edinburgh, in National Museum Scotland, and I became very conscious about the museum space, and the museum space for non-Western art. And for scroll paintings in particular, I feel acutely. And when we want to display the Chinese scroll painting, we need to be very, very careful how we display that, how we could convey that history of the viewing and the display to contemporary audience, to the audience from the European culture. And it's sometimes difficult issue to resolve. And because the museum, modern museum or Western museum, even the Chinese museums nowadays, because the influence of the Western museum practice, and it's the whole infrastructure, whole system is based on a modern culture, which sometimes are not necessarily sympathetic to the past, the culture that had disappeared. For example, in National Gallery, the display of the altarpiece, and it's a difficult question, and how we can evoke that history of the altarpiece, and at the same time make it appeal to the contemporary society, to the people. And the same question for Chinese painting. And although the different different, I guess, slightly different issues we tackle here. And for example, in the exhibition I curated, and 10 years ago, the masterpiece of Chinese painting, I encountered the problem of how do I display a long scroll, horizontal scroll? Because originally, the hand scroll was viewed in a very private, personal situation. So you took, just one person took the scroll out of the box, you unrolled it, views section by section, from the right to the left. But now in the exhibition, if we display just one section, the audience couldn't see the rest of the section. And if we display the entirety of the scroll, would that work? And then my conclusion in this case was, it works. And for example, this more than 10 meters long, the scroll by 18th century court artist called 𝗱𝗃𝗲𝗁, who painted this for a single person, 𝗱𝗃𝗲𝗁 Emperor. And this not supposed to be displayed, and only for the emperor himself to enjoy this painting. It's called proper Suzhou Qianlong visited in his southern inspections. But now we displayed it in the full length. It's full length. Instead of audience or visitor unroll the scroll and the audience move their steps, the feet, and section by section to look at this. And I remember I was really moved, touched by the scene that the audience even formed a queue and from the beginning of the scroll and look slowly, step by step, look through the scroll. And in that way, it's the opposite direction, isn't it? Instead of you moving physically, you moving the scroll section by section, you move your steps and section by section. But another way is you can move the image using the modern technology. Again, you can see section by section. So that's why today some commentators say the Chinese scroll painting, particularly the horizontal painting, it's like a movie. And it has a panoramic view. It has the moving image, the quality in there. It's not like in European, classical European Renaissance, the painting, you see from a fixed viewpoint, and you see the things from many viewpoints, like David Hockney.
Thank you so much for sharing those fascinating insights. And so as I've mentioned, these are my break questions, and I hope to elicit more jade ones. Okay, so I'd like to open the floor and welcome questions and feedback.